In the beginning, there was only silence, and from that silence, faith whispered. Long before empires carved the void into dominions, before stars were numbered and catalogued by scholars in white-lit towers, there existed a people whose hearts were alight with fire that no darkness could extinguish. They called it faith, not as the scholars of the ages would define it in fragile syllables, nor as poets would sing of fleeting inspiration, but as an eternal spark, a force that bound the cosmos to the hearts of mortals. Faith was both weapon and shield, prophet and martyr, and in that spark, the first echoes of the Imperium were born. The world they inhabited was a barren one, scarred by eons of struggle, with skies choked in the ash of forgotten gods. Cities rose like exhalations from the dust, monumental and defiant, their spires reaching as if to pierce the heavens themselves. Yet these cities, magnificent though they were empty without the fire of belief. It was the same for the people. Without faith, flesh became hollow, and bones were nothing but brittle vessels. And so they clung, desperately and lovingly, to the unseen, to the promise of something greater than the mundane chains of their existence. Faith was not gentle in those days. It demanded obedience, loyalty, and sacrifice. It was a forge, shaping hearts like steel, and those who entered its fire emerged either unbroken or entirely consumed. Among the people, there were those who would rise to command nations, their authority cemented not by blood alone, but by the fervor they inspired. And among these leaders, there were those who wielded faith as one wields fire, a source of light and warmth, but also a force that could burn all to ash. They gathered in the temples, these colossal monuments of stone and bronze, their columns engraved with the tales of battles fought not only on fields of soil, but within the hearts of men. The temples were dark, yet pierced by streams of gold and amber light that fell like holy rain to the fractured glass of the ceilings. Shadows danced along the walls, and in those shadows, the faithful saw visions of the divine, figures of impossible perfection, radiant and terrible, who demanded devotion and whispered secrets in the flickering glow. Each believer knelt, their voices rising in chants that were both a plea and a declaration, and the air vibrated with resonance older than memory itself. It was during these early years that the first orders of the Imperium were formed, warriors and clerics bound together not only by martial prowess, but by a doctrine older than the oldest stars. They called themselves the custodians of the Ember, guardians of a truth so potent it could reshape worlds. Each initiation was a trial, a test of body and soul. To survive was to be reborn. To falter was to be consumed by the very fire one sought to wield. And yet, every believer, every aspirant, understood that the fire was not cruel but honest. It revealed what lay hidden, stripped away pretense, and demanded a purity of purpose that few could achieve. The chronicles tell of a man, known only as the First Flame, whose faith burned brighter than any before him. It was said that when he entered the halls of the dying temples, the air itself bent to his conviction, carrying his voice like wind across the barren plains. He spoke of unity, of an Imperium forged not merely of stone and steel, but hearts beating in resonance with the divine will. Men and women who heard him were not merely convinced. They were transfigured. Their doubts were scattered like ash before a gust of wind, and their spirits ignited with fervor that would leave its mark across millennia. But faith is never simple. It is not a gentle guide. It is a trial that tests even those with the purest of hearts. For every believer there is doubt, and for every spark there is a threat of extinction. The First Flame knew this. He spoke off from the shadow of the ember, a darkness that crept not from the void, but from the heart itself. It was a corruption of doubt, the decay of purpose, the poison that could turn devotion into tyranny. And yet, he also knew that without fire, without the consuming passion of belief, the Imperium could never rise. To wield faith was to dance on the edge of oblivion, and only the boldest dared to step forward. The cities of the Imperium grew as the fire of faith spread. Roads of polished stone stretched like veins across the continents, connecting temples, citadels, and academies of knowledge. Scholars chronicled the rise of custodians, recording every ritual, every victory, and every martyrdom in volumes bound with the hides of sacred beasts. The ink of their writings was mixed with ash from the pyres of the faithful, a reminder that creation and destruction are eternally intertwined. In those halls of learning, the young were taught not only the ways of logic and reason, but the language of devotion. The subtle gestures, the silent prayers, the unspoken truths that gave form to the formless and voice to the voiceless. Yet even as faith illuminated the Imperium, it cast shadows as long and dark as the void between the stars. Conflict arose, not between nations, but between hearts. What one deemed sacred, another might see as blasphemy. Rival sects emerged, each claiming to hold the ultimate understanding of the Ember. Their debates were fierce, and their battles more so. Cities were scorched in the name of purity. Sacred texts were torn and rewritten. The faithful sometimes fell to violence as easily as they had risen to devotion. And through it all, the first flame watched, knowing that the fire, for all its beauty, could never be tamed entirely. It was a living force, and it demanded reverence and respect, lest it consume all that it had birthed. Stories tell of the burning pilgrimage, a journey undertaken by the devout to walk the path of the Ember, to confront doubt and emerge purified. The pilgrims traversed deserts where the sun cracked the stone, climbed mountains where the winds threatened to tear flesh from bone, and descended into caverns where echoes mocked the prayers of mortals. Many never returned, swallowed by the trials they had embraced. But those who did return were changed, their eyes alight with a flame of certainty, their voices carrying the cadence of destiny itself. They became the living testament to faith, the messengers who carried the heat of belief into farthest reaches of the Imperium, spreading both hope and fear in equal measure. Faith in these times was not merely a personal act. It was the axis upon which the Imperium turned. Kings and warlords, scholars and scribes, artisans and soldiers, all bowed to its influence. Laws were written in its honor, songs sung in its praise, and wars waged in its defense. Yet it was not blind obedience that gave the Imperium its strength, but the recognition that faith, at its core, was an acknowledgment of the unknown, a bridge between the mortal and the divine. To believe was to confront the vastness of the cosmos and to declare, with every heartbeat, that one spirit was capable of more than flesh and bone. And so the Imperium was born in fire and shadow, in devotion and doubt. It was a world of extremes, where the smallest whisper could ignite revolutions, and the faintest flicker of loyalty could forge legends. In the hearts of its people burned the Ember, a reminder that even in the void, even amidst the ruins of empires past, there remained a spark that no darkness could snuff out. As centuries passed, the first flame became myth, his name whispered in sacred corridors and shouted on battlefields alike. Yet his presence endured, not as flesh or voice, but as the embodiment of the principle that birthed a civilization. Faith is both the light that guides and the fire that tests. It is the ember that survives the ages, carried in the hearts of those who dare to believe. Remember, the chronicles whisper, faith is not gentle. It burns. It consumes. But in its fire, the Imperium was forged, and in its fire it shall endure. The stars themselves seem to acknowledge this truth. Even now, across the empty reaches of the cosmos, there are worlds where the wind carries the scent of incense, where cathedrals rise from stone as if sculpted by unseen hands, and where the faithful raise their voices in defiance of oblivion. The ember has not dimmed. It waits, patient and eternal, for those willing to step into the fire and confront the unknown. And those who do will find that faith is not merely belief, it is destiny itself. As the chapter closes, let us hear the silent echo of history. Every civilization that has burned in the void has left a mark upon the stars, and every heart that carries the ember carries a fragment of eternity. The fire of faith is not bound by time or space. It is the eternal witness, the constant flame, the silent crucible in which the Imperium was and shall always be forged. And thus, the first ember was lit, and the cosmos trembled in its light. When faith burns bright, it can illuminate entire worlds or set them ablaze. The first ember belief had taken root, and from it grew the Imperium, a civilization forged in fire and devotion. Yet even the purest flame casts shadows, and in the heart of devotion there lies a truth that few dare to acknowledge. Faith, once armed, becomes war. The custodians of the ember understood this better than any, for they were tasked not only with nurturing belief but with defending it against the encroaching darkness, the heretic, and the indifferent. To wield faith as a weapon was no simple endeavor. It demanded discipline, courage, and the willingness to confront one's own soul amid the chaos of battle. The chronicles speak of the first crusade, though the word then had not yet taken shape in the tongues of men. Entire continents rose in rebellion against the nascent Imperium, spurred by fear, greed, and skepticism. Cities that had once been silent now erupted with the clamoring of armies, their banners snapping in the wind like thunderclaps. The custodians marched not as mere soldiers, but as living testaments to belief, their hearts bound to the ember, their resolve unbreakable. Every step they took was both prayer and declaration. Faith was the shield, the sword, and the standard under which they fought. The battlefields were cathedrals of devastation. Steel met steel, and the air was thick with smoke and incense, each mingling in a perfumed haze that both concealed and revealed the human cost of devotion. Warriors fell not simply to blades or fire, but to doubt, the momentary faltering conviction that could undo years of discipline. Yet for those whose hearts remained steadfast, every strike became sacred, every movement ritualized, every victory a liturgy in blood and fire. War in this light was not merely destruction. It was the purification of the spirit, the crucible in which loyalty was tested and the forge in which legend was made. It was in this crucible that the First Legion emerged, the true bearers of devotion as a weapon. They were chosen not for physical prowess alone, though their skill was unmatched, but for the intensity of their faith. To witness them in battle was to see belief given form, a living inferno that turned hesitation into certainty and fear into obedience. Their armor shone with the radiance of sanctified metal, engraved with runes that pulsed with the memory of every victory and martyrdom. Each helmeted face had not just flesh and bone, but a soul alight with the ember, a testament to the truth that devotion, once weaponized, could bend reality itself. But war is not simply a matter of force. It is an art, a sacred geometry of movement and strategy, and the custodians were as much scholars of combat as they were priests of faith. They studied the flow of armies as others studied scripture, tracing the patterns of victory and defeat like constellations in a celestial map. They learned to predict the hearts of men, to anticipate hesitation and doubt, and to strike where conviction faltered. And in this, the Crusades became not just wars of territory, but wars of spirit, battles waged in the minds and hearts of those who stood against the Imperium as much as on the soil they fought upon. There are tales of entire legions entering battle with eyes closed, trusting the ember to guide their hands and hearts. Some say that in those moments, the distinction between mortal and divine vanished, and the battlefield became a realm where angels and men were indistinguishable. Arrows rained like judgment, swords struck like lightning, and in the chaos, the faithful moved with a synchronicity that seemed preordained. It was both terrifying and awe-inspiring, a living testament to the potency of belief when harnessed as a weapon. Yet even as the Imperium triumphed, war revealed a paradox of the heart of devotion. Those who wielded faith as fire could be consumed by it. The longer the Crusades raged, the more the line between righteousness and fanaticism blurred. Cities were scorched beyond recognition, and innocents were caught in the purifying flame. The custodians understood that zeal unchecked was a double-edged sword. It could forge empires, but it could also burn them to ash. This realization did not diminish their conviction. If anything, it intensified it, for they knew that true faith required both discipline and sacrifice, both mercy and judgment. War, after all, was the ultimate test of devotion. Among the stories etched into chronicles is that of the siege of Obsidian Spire, a fortress built atop blackened cliffs, where the storms of the void tore at stone and flesh alike. The defenders were numerous, hardened and unyielding, yet the First Legion approached with serenity that unsettled their enemies. They did not charge blindly. They advanced in solemn procession, each step a cadence, each gesture a prayer. As the sun fell behind the horizon, casting the cliffs in blood-red light, the custodians unleashed the ember in full glory. Fire rained from the heavens, not merely as weapon, but as testament. By dawn, the fortress lay in ruins, its defenders either vanished or converted, and the survivors whispered that the warriors had been more spirit than flesh, more devotion than man. But it was not conquest alone that defined these wars. The custodians of the ember understood the necessity of memory, of ensuring that every victory, every sacrifice, and every lesson survived the ages. The spoils of battle were not counted merely in territory or wealth, but in the stories they inspired. Songs were sung of martyrs who had given their lives not for power, but for the continuity of belief. Sculptors carved reliefs that captured the agony and ecstasy of devotion, the fleeting glances of fear, the resolute stare of faith that refused to bend, and scribes documented strategies as prayers, turning the art of war into an almost sacred liturgy that would guide future generations. Yet in the shadow of victory, there was always doubt. Even the most devout questioned morality of their deeds, wondering whether the fires they had unleashed truly served the divine purpose, or whether they had merely fed the insatiable hunger of men. In quiet moments, leaders would retreat to solitary chambers, gazing upon maps etched with the blood of thousands, contemplating the cost of wielding faith as a weapon. They wondered whether the ember, so potent and eternal, was also a curse, an inheritance of fire that demanded endless devotion, endless sacrifice, and endless conflict. And in these moments, the chronicles remind us, the first flame's words were recalled. To wield faith is to carry both creation and destruction. One cannot exist without the other, and the world will judge not only the outcome, but the purity of intent. These words were both warning and guide, and they became the cornerstone of the Imperium's martial doctrine. For every soldier who raised sword or spear, for every commander who strategized with the precision of a priest, there existed an unspoken covenant. Devotion was a path, and war was a crucible. Throughout the centuries, countless battles were fought across continents and stars. Yet the nature of these wars remained constant. Empires rose and fell, but the relationship between faith and conflict endured. It was a rhythm as ancient as the ember itself. Belief would ignite, devotion would harden into armor, and war would follow, inevitable and unrelenting. Each victory reinforced the cycle, and each defeat tested it, reminding all that while the fire of faith could illuminate the cosmos, it could just as easily burn to oblivion. Even now, in the hushed corners of the Imperium, one can hear whispers of those ancient conflicts, of legions that move like shadows, of battles fought under alien suns, of soldiers whose devotion made them more than human. In these stories, war is never mere violence. It is a manifestation of faith's potency, the proof that belief can shape reality, bend the will of nations, and carve legends that endure beyond flesh and time. And yet, the flames of devotion are never tame. They consume as much as they illuminate. The Imperium learned, slowly and often painfully, that the most formidable adversary is not the heretic, nor the traitor, nor the invading force, but the corruption of belief itself. Fanaticism, unchecked zeal, and the arrogance of certainty can destroy as surely as any enemy. To fight without reflection, to follow the ember blindly, is to risk becoming the very darkness one seeks to vanquish. Thus, the chronicles whisper, war was baptized in fire, devotion forged in blood, and the Imperium endured, not merely as a state, but as a testament to the power of faith turned to purpose. And in that crucible, every soldier became both witness and participant in a narrative older than time, where belief and battle are inseparable, and every victory carries a shadow of sacrifice. As the chapter closes, the echoes of distant battlefields linger in the void, the silent testimony of those who dared to wield the ember as a weapon. The Imperium's armies march onward, carrying both light and shadow, both conviction and doubt, a perpetual reminder that faith, once armed, is both a beacon and a scourge. And in every clash of steel, every cry of triumph, and every whispered prayer in the wind, the eternal truth resounds. Devotion, when weaponized, reshapes the world for better or for worse. And so the first wars were waged, and the Imperium learned that faith, once turned to fire, could never be contained. Memory is not a vessel of truth, but a canvas for devotion. In the wake of countless wars and the relentless march of the ember, the Imperium discovered a quiet, subtler battlefield, the mind itself. For while faith could ignite armies and shape destiny, it was memory that preserved and reshaped the legacy of what had been wrought. The custodians of the ember, having forged devotion into weapons, now turned their gaze inward, realizing that belief could be wielded not only against flesh and stone, but against the mind. In the realm of memory, truth was malleable, and prayer was the hand that sculpted it. Cities of the Imperium, gleaming and fortified, were as much libraries as they were fortresses. Their spires housed vast archives of parchment and crystal, of recorded chant and sung liturgy, meticulously chronicling victories, losses, sacrifices, and miracles. Yet these records were never neutral. They were imbued with the will of the faithful. Events were preserved not as they had occurred, but as they were understood through the ember, filtered by devotion, sanctified by intention. To remember was not merely to recall, but to believe, and to believe was to shape the memory itself. It was said that the scribes of the ember could alter history with a single stroke of ink, rewriting the deeds of men so that the acts of the faithful shone eternal, and the faltering were softened or forgotten. Chronicles were layered like palimpsests, where older truths were smothered beneath the weight of devotion, yet traces of what truly occurred always lingered, faint as the echo of a half-remembered hymn. The custodians understood that memory was not a passive reflection, but an active force capable of sustaining faith or eroding it. In every scroll, every tablet, every whispered story passed from lips to ears, history and belief were inseparable. Among the earliest records is the account of the Ashen Cathedra, a temple that had burned in the first crusades. The flames had reduced stone to powder, scrolls to ash, and lives to whispers. Yet the scribes reconstructed the narrative as a testament to perseverance. They chronicled how the faithful, in the face of fire and death, had maintained devotion to the last breath. Survivors and descendants internalized this version of memory as truth, though fragment of the unrecorded reality of panic, despair, and failure remained hidden in hushed recollections. Here, the act of remembering became a crucible, testing belief against the subtle corrosions of doubt. Memory, however, was not solely a tool of preservation. It was also a weapon. The custodians discovered that to control remembrance was to control hearts. They instituted ceremonies, liturgies, and rites designed to imprint the ember upon minds with such permanence that alternative truths faded into shadows. The faithful were reminded repeatedly of victories that inspired awe, of martyrs whose deaths bore cosmic significance, of miracles that confirmed the divinity of devotion. These repeated acts of remembrance did not merely honor the past. They reshaped perception, turning history into a mirror that reflected only the light of faith. Yet even as memory was shaped, it remained fragile, vulnerable to whispers of doubt and the erosion of time. The more devout the society, the more meticulously it labored to preserve its recollections. Monuments were erected not only to victories, but to the act of remembering itself. Vast stone constructs engraved with glyphs that recounted events in sacred rhythm. The largest of these, the Hall of Eternal Witnesses, contained inscriptions so intricate that a single page could consume a lifetime of study. Here, visitors were not merely observers. They were participants in an ongoing act of devotion. To read, to chant, to reflect was to align oneself with the collective memory of the Imperium, a communion with both past and divine. But the shaping of memory is not without peril. When devotion eclipses objectivity, history becomes myth, and myth may mask cruelty or injustice. The custodians were acutely aware of this risk. Rival sects and dissenting scribes challenged the official chronicles, claiming that the narrative had been warped to serve the ember rather than truth. Conflict erupted not only on battlefields, but in libraries and council chambers, where the pen proved as mighty as a sword. Manuscripts were defended with ritual precision. Debates were settled with oaths, trial by ordeal, or divine consultation. Each confrontation left a mark, subtle or pronounced, on the memory of the Imperium, shaping its self-perception for generations. The greatest instrument of memory was prayer. Not casual invocations, but structured, communal acts designed to imprint the mind and soul. The faithful were taught to recall acts of devotion, to meditate on the sacrifices of heroes, and to internalize victories as if they had personally witnessed them. In this way, history became not merely a record, but a living presence within every believer. Over time, even those born centuries after First Crusades felt themselves entwined with events that they had never truly seen. Memory became inheritance. Remembrance became destiny. Among the custodians, there existed a secret cadre known as the Keepers of the Forgotten. Their task was paradoxical: to erase certain memories while amplifying others, ensuring that the ember's narrative remained unbroken and unchallenged. They worked silently, often cloaked in shadows, moving through archives and temples to adjust inscriptions, replace texts, and subtly guide recitation. Their presence was largely invisible, yet their influence was absolute. They knew that a single forgotten martyr, a single misremembered event, could unravel centuries of faith. Memory was fragile, malleable, and sacred, a weapon as potent as any blade or fire. Legends tell of the ritual of recollection, performed on the anniversary of the ember's first ignition. Entire populations would gather in plazas and cathedrals, chanting the stories of triumph and sacrifice, their voices weaving a tapestry of sound that reinforced collective memory. In these moments, the line between past and present blurred. The faithful experienced events as if they were living them anew, and the stories became internalized truths. To be present in the ritual was to inhabit the history of the Imperium itself, to merge personal identity with the eternal narrative of devotion. Yet memory, as shaped by faith, is not absolute. Shadows linger. Among the chronicles are subtle traces of doubt, faint echoes of events omitted or altered. Scholars and philosophers, often marginalized, risked persecution by exploring these shadows, questioning the official recollections. Some disappeared entirely, leaving only whispers behind. And in these whispers, the deeper tension of the Imperium becomes clear. Devotion requires memory, yet memory requires control, and control is never absolute. The past, no matter how carefully curated, retains an ability to resist, to haunt, and to speak truth in defiance of doctrine. The custodians accepted this as part of the divine order. Memory was a living entity, a reflection of the ember itself, illuminating, purifying, and sometimes consuming. They understood that faith could guide and protect, but that it could also mislead and dominate. The act of remembrance was therefore sacred, ritualized, and deliberate. It was not passive. It was a participation in history, a covenant with the past, and a testament to the enduring power of belief. We do not simply remember. The chronicles whisper, we reshape, we illuminate, we sanctify. Memory is the forge of faith, and those who control hold the power of eternity. And so, as the first fires of crusades faded into legend and the Imperium expanded across continents and stars, the act of memory became as vital as any sword or shield. Monuments, archives, chants, and prayers all converged to create a tapestry in which the past was not a fixed point, but a living, breathing presence. The faithful came to understand that they were participants in a continuum, where their thoughts, actions, and devotion would echo beyond their mortal span. Memory was a river in which the Imperium sailed, carrying all who believed toward a future defined by the ember. The chapter closes with a silent observation of the timeless chronicler. Even as empires rise and fall, even as stars die and are reborn, the act of remembering persists. Through prayer, ritual, and devotion, the Imperium preserves its truth, however mutable, and ensures that the flame of faith continues to illuminate both present and past. And yet, beneath the surface of curated history, the faint, persistent murmur of unrecorded events reminds the faithful that memory is never wholly owned, never entirely tamed, and always contains shadows. And thus, in the sanctity of remembrance, the Imperium learned that the past is not simply lived. It is written, believed, and eternally reborn. In the hands of the devout, the inanimate becomes divine. As the Imperium expanded and faith burned ever brighter, the world around it evolved in tandem, shaped by devotion as much as by intellect. From the simplest gears to grandest engines, technology rose not as cold, indifferent machinery, but as vessels of the ember, tools through which belief took form and the divine touched the mortal plane. In the Imperium, there was no distinction between miracle and mechanism. Every cog, every wheel, every spark was infused with sacred significance. The faithful saw not machines, but conduits of transcendence, and in this perception, the line between artifice and miracle dissolved. The earliest artificers of the Imperium were priests and scholars alike, known as the techno-sanctifiers. They labored in vast halls, half temple and half workshop, their fingers deftly inscribing glyphs on metal plates, calibrating mechanisms with the precision of ritual, and infusing machinery with the flame of devotion. Every engine was consecrated before its activation. Every automaton was baptized in fire and prayer. It was believed that only then could the machine truly serve the will of the ember, functioning not merely by logic, but by devotion itself. To witness a techno-sanctifier at work was to watch faith take tangible form, to see the divine wrought from iron and crystal, and understand that every mechanism carried within it a fragment of eternity. Among the first of these marvels was the choir engine, a vast construct whose purpose was to amplify sacred chant across entire cities. When activated, its resonant frequencies could shatter walls. Some of the faithful, and induce visions of the divine. The people who heard believed they were touched by the ember itself, experiencing the presence of the sacred in every vibration. Scholars and engineers, studying the instrument, marveled at its precision, yet even they acknowledged that its effects were greater than mere mechanics. The choir engine had become a bridge between mortal and divine, a testament to the belief that in the Imperium, faith and technology were inseparable. Machines of war, too, were suffused with devotion. The custodians of the ember soon realized that to wield mechanical power effectively, it must be sanctified. Siege engines were etched with runes. War constructs were blessed by priests. Weapons were anointed with sacred oil before every campaign. Soldiers came to view their armor and arms not as mere tools, but as extensions of their faith. To strike with a blade, to fire a cannon, or to maneuver a mechanized chariot was to enact a liturgy, each movement a prayer, each engagement a hymn of power and purpose. In battle, the distinction between soldier and machine blurred. Devotion and gear fused to create an almost supernatural force. Yet, as with all instruments of power, there was peril. Machines, no matter how sanctified, were indifferent to intent. A misaligned gear could crush the faithful as easily as the enemy. A misfired cannon could devastate friend and foe alike. The techno-sanctifiers were aware of this duality and taught that reverence alone was insufficient. Understanding, discipline, and vigilance were required. Faith could animate machinery, but only wisdom could guide it. In this tension, the Imperium discovered a profound truth. Devotion could grant power, but it demanded responsibility. Miracles without comprehension were indistinguishable from catastrophe. Among the chronicles is a tale of the luminous automata, colossal figures built to patrol sacred precincts and defend the faithful. Constructed of iron, crystal, and alloys unknown to common mortals, they moved with uncanny precision, their every motion a study in ritualized grace. To behold them was to witness devotion rendered tangible. Humanoid forms that seemed to breathe with purpose, their eyes glowing with the light of the ember. Yet, the chronicles caution, the luminous automata were not merely guardians. They were judges, interpreters of faith, and executors of devotion's will. Many who approached them without proper reverence vanished, their absence explained only by the ineffable logic of the ember. In the halls of innovation, the faithful whispered devices that could preserve consciousness, capturing memory and devotion within crystalline matrices. These relics, known as spirit engines, allowed minds to endure beyond mortal decay, tethered to the Imperium in perpetuity. Scholars debated whether these preserved consciousnesses remained truly alive, or whether they were echoes animated by the collective faith of the living. Yet for the populace, the distinction was irrelevant. To witness a spirit engine was to witness eternity itself, a fusion of intellect, memory, and devotion that transcended flesh and time. Machines, it was said, could become saints. Even the simplest tools were elevated to the status of miracles. Water wheels, mills, and furnaces were blessed, their operation intertwined with ritual. The faithful believed that through devotion, even the most mundane act, grinding grain, forging metal, or purifying water, could become a sacred service. Technology became both practical and poetic, a language through which the divine communicated with the mortal. It was no coincidence that the most prosperous cities of the Imperium were also those where faith and machinery were inseparable. Productivity itself was a liturgy, and efficiency a form of worship. Yet not all embraced this marriage of machine and belief. Critics warned that the faith placed in mechanisms might breed complacency, that reliance on devices could erode personal devotion. Some whispered that miracles performed by machines were hollow, lacking the moral and spiritual weight of true belief. But the Imperium, forged in fire and battle, regarded such warnings as minor shadows against the brilliance of achievement. Machines were tools of destiny, and faith imbued them with purpose beyond mere function. Doubt existed only at the periphery. The core devotion recognized a miracle inherent in every cog, every gear, every spark of engineered fire. Wars, too, were transformed by this fusion of technology and faith. Armies no longer marched with swords alone. They advanced with mechanical titans and engines of devotion, constructs that could level cities, pierce fortresses, and inspire awe simultaneously. Siege towers became cathedrals of flame. Trebuchets were sanctified to rain judgment upon the unjust. Armored vehicles were paraded as symbols of divine favor. In this way, technology did not replace belief, but magnified it. Each act of war became a testament, each campaign a sermon, each conquest a demonstration of potential devotion given form. And yet, the chronicles caution that the true miracle was not the machines themselves, but the minds that perceived them. Faith made technology divine, just as it made the smallest ritual sacred. Without devotion, the engines were inert, the automatons lifeless, and the spirit engines mere crystal prisms. Only when belief imbued them with purpose did they transcend mortality, becoming conduits of the ember and instruments of destiny. The Imperium learned that miracles are not inherent in objects. They are manifested through perception, intention, and reverence of those who witness them. Thus it was revealed, the chronicles whisper, that the divine is not in the machine, but in the hand that guides it, the mind that conceives it, and the heart that believes. And so, as centuries passed and the Imperium expanded across continents and stars, its cities became symphonies of sacred machinery, its armies instruments of devotion, and its scholars both priests and engineers. The faithful understood that technology, when touched by the ember, was not merely a tool but a bridge, a conduit between the mortal and the divine, between purpose and power, between belief and reality itself. Machines became saints, engines became prophets, and every act of creation was a prayer in motion. The chapter closes with a silent observation of the timeless chronicler. Across the cosmos, the faithful continue to marvel at the miracles wrought by human ingenuity sanctified by devotion. Engines hum with the cadence of prayer. Automatons patrol with purpose both mechanical and sacred, and spirit engines preserve consciousness, tethering generations to the eternal narrative of the ember. Technology, when sanctified by faith, ceases to be inert. It becomes alive. It becomes eternal. It becomes sacred. And so, the Imperium learned that in devotion, all things, from stone to steel, from mind to machine, may be made divine. They spoke of destiny as if it were carved in stone, yet the Imperium learned that the stones themselves could be reshaped. From the first spark of the ember to the grand engines of devotion, the Imperium had learned many truths. Faith could ignite armies, memory could sanctify victories, and technology could elevate mortals toward the divine. Yet amid all these revelations, the greatest challenge remained the most elusive destiny. It was whispered in cathedrals, sung in chronicles, and etched into monuments that every life, every empire, and every star was guided by an inexorable force, a cosmic design from which none could stray. To the faithful, destiny was the path of the righteous, the inevitable triumph of the ember. But as the custodians discovered, destiny is not a gift. It is a trial, a canvas upon which free will and devotion leave their mark. The earliest prophecies of the Imperium spoke of a golden convergence, a time when all worlds aligned, and the ember will illuminate the cosmos in perfect harmony. Scholars debated the meaning, theologians preached the inevitability, and leaders claimed its promise as divine sanction for conquest. To the faithful, destiny was comfort, a certainty in the chaos of life and war. Yet those who observed closely, those who studied the currents of power and faith, recognized a subtle truth. Destiny was a mirror of belief, not a decree of the cosmos. What was said to be inevitable was only inevitable because the Imperium believed it so. The custodians of the ember understood the paradox of destiny more than most. Warriors who marched into battle were not merely following orders. They were fulfilling a narrative sanctified by centuries of devotion. Every victory reinforced the perception of predestination. Every failure tested it. Leaders used the illusion of inevitability to command loyalty, to unite disparate worlds, and to bind souls to the ember. Yet beneath the veneer of certainty lay choice, sacrifice, and the ceaseless weight of responsibility. Destiny, it became clear, was both liberator and oppressor, a promise that could inspire courage or suffocate dissent. Among the chronicles is a tale of the stellar pilgrimage, a journey undertaken by the most devout to witness the alignment of the three sacred moons. The faithful believed that at the moment of convergence, the course of empires would be affirmed, that the hands of the universe would guide them to their ordained fate. Entire fleets traversed void and storm. Civilizations poured resources into observation, and prayers were offered in languages older than memory. Yet when the moons aligned, the sky revealed only light and shadow, indifferent to mortal expectation. Those who had undertaken the pilgrimage learned that destiny is not a hand that moves the universe. It is a courage to act within it. To follow blindly is to mistake narrative for reality, and to assume inevitability is to surrender the power of choice. Philosophers of the Imperium wrote extensively on this subtle tension. They argued that the notion of fate is a tool, a structure to impose order upon chaos, a prism through which the mind interprets uncertainty. They contended that belief in destiny grants the faithful strength, yet also imposes restraint. To challenge the ember is to risk heresy, yet to ignore its guidance is to court ruin. Destiny, therefore, is not the path set in stone, but the stone itself, a material to shape, a force to engage, and a challenge to the will. Those who embrace this understanding walk the treacherous line, for in shaping destiny, they assume both divine authority and mortal risk. The custodians wielded this duality with precision. They would interpret omens, celestial alignments, and ancient texts not merely as signs, but as instruments of direct action. To the masses, their proclamations seemed absolute. To those who observed the intricate workings, they were masterful applications of psychology, belief, and devotion. Destiny became a living narrative, an art of perception that united the Imperium under the guise of inevitability. Leaders claimed the support of cosmic order, while scholars knew that it was a devotion of the faithful and their willingness to act that truly moved the world. Yet even in the embrace of perceived inevitability, the Imperium could not escape uncertainty. Civilizations rise and fall, stars burn and die, and the currents of fate are as unpredictable as the void. The chronicles recount the collapse of Art and Spire, a great city believed to be invincible due to its alignment with the Golden Convergence. Leaders proclaimed destiny had favored them. Citizens worshipped the certainty of triumph. And yet, in a single night, a tempest of fire and ash reduced the city to ruins. The faithful survived, but the lesson endured. Destiny promises, but does not guarantee. It inspires, but does not protect. Faith, not inevitability, carries the weight of survival. The paradox of destiny shaped the governance of the Imperium. Laws, rituals, and hierarchies were all framed as manifestations of cosmic order, yet they were human constructions calibrated to sustain belief. Military campaigns were declared inevitable, yet the strategies relied upon intellect, coordination, and courage. Temples spoke of prophecies, yet scribes and astronomers verified celestial movements with precise calculations. The Imperium thrived not because destiny was absolute, but because its leaders mastered the art of projecting inevitability, giving form to uncertainty and channeling devotion toward purposeful action. Among the faithful, destiny inspired both awe and fear. Children were raised with tales of predestined heroes and inevitable triumphs. Adults reflected on the weight of fate, reconciling their personal desires with the greater narrative. Warriors entered battle believing they were instrument of the ember, yet they knew that only courage, skill, and sacrifice could fulfill prophecy. Philosophers meditated upon the interplay of free will and divine narrative, while mystics claimed communion with the cosmic pattern itself. Destiny was at once teacher, tyrant, and companion, shaping lives while demanding constant vigilance. In the annals of the Imperium, there exists a story known as the Mirror of Fate. The artifact was said to reveal the path of every being who gazed into it. Yet the visions were enigmatic, fragmented, and mutable. Observers swore that the mirror reflected both potential and consequence, a tapestry woven from choices yet to be made. Those who relied entirely upon its revelations often faltered, while those who interpreted its symbols with discernment thrived. The lesson was clear. Destiny offers vision, but not certainty. It grants guidance, but not absolution. To confront fate is to act within its framework, while shaping its course with courage and wisdom. Through centuries of expansion, war, and devotion, the Imperium embraced the paradox of destiny. Faith illuminated the path, memory preserved the narrative, and technology amplified its power. Yet none could fully dictate the flow of events. Destiny was both a tool and a test, a framework that demanded engagement, reflection, and moral responsibility. The custodians recognized that to claim inevitability is to claim authority over both belief and action, yet they also acknowledged the fragility of such power. The universe is indifferent, yet human devotion gives form to uncertainty, and within that tension, the Imperium endured. And thus, the chronicles whisper, the faithful learn that destiny is not a sentence, but a challenge. It is not a decree, but a canvas. and those who dare to act within it, guided by the ember, shape their own eternity. The chapter closes with a silent observation of the timeless chronicler. Across the stars, countless civilizations cling to the notion of inevitability, yet only those who understand the delicate balance between faith, action, and consequence endure. Destiny is neither gift nor curse. It is a mirror held to the soul, a challenge to courage, and a reminder that belief without effort is hollow. The Imperium, forged in fire and memory, technology and devotion, persists because it understands a subtle truth. The future is never predetermined, yet it can be shaped by those who carry the ember. And so, the Imperium learned that destiny is not written in the stars. It is forged in the hearts of the faithful. And when the fire fades, the silence speaks louder than any hymn. For millennia, the Imperium had risen, expanded, and endured through the ember, through faith that ignited hearts, through war that forged devotion into steel, through memory that reshaped history, through technology that transformed miracles into machines, and through destiny that guided the willing hand. Yet, even the brightest flame eventually faces the quiet inevitability of dusk. Silence is a final crucible, the unspoken test of all belief, the witness to what remains when the world grows still. It is neither enemy nor ally. It is the absence in which all truths, illusions, victories, and failures converge. The chronicles speak of the hallowed void, a realm both real and metaphorical, where faith is extinguished and only echoes persist. Entire worlds, once radiant with devotion, lie desolate beneath cold stars, their monuments shattered, their voices lost to time. In these silent landscapes, the weight of history presses upon the bones of ruins, and the memory of the ember lingers faintly, like the scent of incense long burned. Travelers who wander these places speak not of fear, but of awe, for silence does not merely erase. It witnesses, observes, and carries the essence of what once was. Silence is not absence, the custodians understood, but presence in its purest form. In the quiet, the deeds of the faithful are revealed in their entirety. Unadorned by ritual, unshaped by memory, unamplified by technology. The victories remain, but so too do the failures. The triumphs shine, but the sacrifices echo in equal measure. The ember, once roaring and consuming, is reduced to a whisper within the soul. It is here that the Imperium confronts the ultimate test. To acknowledge truth without distortion, to perceive devotion without adornment, and to reconcile with the inevitable passage of all things. The hallowed void was not merely a place of endings, but also a mirror of reflection. Pilgrims who ventured into its depths reported visions, fragment of memory and prophecy intertwined, revealing the impermanence of even the most sacred constructs. Temples crumbled into dust, armies became echoes, machines lay dormant, and chronicles faded to ash. Yet in this emptiness, the faithful discovered clarity. The ember, though diminished, remained not as fire, but as the essence of devotion itself. Faith, when stripped of spectacle and ritual, revealed its purest form, a quiet resilience, a conscious choice, a silent testament to the human spirit. The chronicles recount the tale of the silent monastery, perched upon a cliff overlooking an endless sea of blackened stars. Once a beacon of the ember, it had withstood centuries of conflict, innovation, and divine observance. Yet over time, its voices grew faint, the halls emptied, and even the choir engine fell silent. The last custodian to inhabit the monastery remained not to preserve grandeur, but to bear witness. He recorded the silence, meditated upon it, and finally accepted that the ember does not always roar. Sometimes its presence is quiet, its proof subtle, its power revealed only to those patient enough to hear the faintest heartbeat of devotion. Silence also teaches the cost of hubris. Throughout history, the Imperium had flourished through ambition, zeal, and unyielding devotion, yet it also faltered when faith became arrogance. Entire civilizations vanished not from external conquest, but from the slow erosion of belief, the exhaustion of devotion, and the neglect of memory. Temples crumbled because no hands maintained them. Engines rusted because no prayers were offered. Chronicles faded because no scribes remained. In silence, the Imperium confronts its mortality, the undeniable truth that even the greatest flame can dim if its light is not continually nourished. The custodians learn that silence is neither punishment nor reward. It is a natural state to which all things return, a canvas upon which both creation and destruction leave their mark. The faithful who understand silence perceive both absence and presence simultaneously, recognizing the lingering potency of devotion even when all else has vanished. They understand that the ember does not cease to exist. It merely transforms, passing from spectacle to subtlety, from outward expression to inward resonance. In this quiet, faith is distilled to its essence, the conscious act of belief in the face of impermanence. Among the lost chronicles is the account of the Vale of Stillness, a vast expanse where once great empires had faded and only ruins remained. Travelers who ventured there reported strange phenomena, whispers of hymns without singers, glimmers of light from shattered engines, and fleeting visions of figures long dead, their devotion lingering like smoke. These remnants of faith were neither illusions nor errors. They were echoes of the ember, demonstrating that even when outward manifestations of devotion fail, the internal flame persists. Silence, paradoxically, preserves what words, rituals, and machines cannot fully capture. The impermanence revealed by silence extends even to destiny. The prophecies that once guided fleets, armies, and empires lose their immediacy when the roar of belief quiets. The golden convergence, once regarded as inevitable, becomes an event observed rather than enforced. Pilgrims arrive not to fulfill a grand plan, but to witness, to reflect, and to measure their devotion against the weight of history. In silence, the illusion of certainty falls away, leaving only the conscious act of choosing, of believing, and of persisting. Fate becomes participatory rather than prescriptive, and the faithful must navigate the void with courage, awareness, and humility. Yet silence is not desolation alone. It is also a source of wisdom. The chronicles note that those who endure long periods of quiet emerge with clarity and perspective unattainable in the clamorous blaze of faith, war, memory, technology, or destiny. They perceive the interconnections of events, the subtle interplay of choices, and the fragile beauty of impermanent triumphs. In this quiet, the custodians discern lessons of balance. Devotion must be tempered with reflection, power with humility, and action with patience. Silence teaches that the greatest strength is not always visible, that the truest victory may be internal, and that faith, when unadorned, endures longer than empires themselves. The final message of the hallowed void is both solemn and transcendent. All things that rise will eventually fall. All fire will eventually dim. All voices will eventually quiet. Yet what remains after the ember wanes is not mere absence, but potential. In silence, the seeds of renewal lie dormant, waiting for the hands, hearts, and minds of those who will believe, act, and remember. The cycle continues, eternal as the stars, yet shaped by conscious devotion rather than blind inevitability. The Imperium endures not because it cannot fade, but because those who bear the ember choose to kindle it anew. And so, when the fire dies, and when the temples are empty, and when the engines cease their hum, there remains only the quiet heartbeat of devotion, small, patient, eternal. The Chronicles close with a final observation from the timeless narrator. Across the silent reaches of the cosmos, there are ruins and echoes, monuments and memories, machines and stars, all testament to the power of faith, and all reminders that even the most brilliant fire eventually yields to stillness. Yet within this stillness lies not despair, but reflection, understanding, and the quiet perpetuation of the ember. Silence is the ultimate crucible, and in enduring it, the faithful learn that devotion is not the roar of fire, nor the clamor of victory, but the steady, eternal pulse that persists beyond all noise. And thus, when the last hymn fades, and the last eye closes upon the ruins of the Imperium, the silence remains, and in it the ember endures forever,